can't wait either. I can't wait. Hello. Oh, look at you. Sean Brown acting like you're all first and stuff. Riley T, are you out there? Is there another Tisver out there? Hiding? Hey, JP. That is Jay Patel. How are you, brother? Good to see you. Who else do I see out there? Do I see anybody else? I think, if I am not mistaken, is that you? Mr. Tyler Oakley, are you out there? Is that you? Is that, oh, yeah. Olympia? Is that you? Good to see you, hi. It's nice to see you. Oh, yay. Hey, Jay, listen to this song. Get in, get out, get in, get out. I know you know that you are me and I am you. And we are here, you're the one to take me down. So take me down, take me down. I know you know that you are me and I am you. JP, Olivia, Michelle Ellis. So take me down, take me down. Walk slowly, step that you can't miss it while you drown. So quiet, I can almost hear my walk slowly. Yes! The poem from last week. Listen to that. It's real. I'm telling you. Creativity is everywhere. It is nice to see you guys. We've got about a minute and 10 seconds. And the rain is here. So is he. And that's really fun. Oh, Mr. Brian shows up. Welcome. Nice to see you live and in person. Let me see. Let's see. Who else decides to show today? Who's hiding out there? Who's out there like wanting to press the button, but you can't? I like it. You know what I like? I love watching the chat on the side start taggling and everybody's welcoming each other to the room. And it's not just me. It's all of us. And I think that that's really wonderful. And the rain is coming. I don't know if you can see it. Oh my gosh. Just perfect. Perfect rain. Perfect rain. I hope that it doesn't get too loud out here. The water's starting to seep off the metal roofs and all the plants are getting love. It's pretty cool. But I suppose with 3 minutes at our place, and as always promised, hello, it's 3:33. Make a wish. School. Oh, yes, that's right. I had some wonderful, wonderful experiences. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday. It is such a gift to be here. I had a different day than usual. I had an opportunity to go up to Gwyn Oaks, my home school at this moment, and I had lunch with Dr. Craig Barlow, representing Sweet. He is out there every day wishing that we were together. The halls are empty. Miss Angela and the custodial team are cleaning up like crazy. The room, very, very lonely. I actually have a little bit of a picture just so that maybe some of you guys can see it. I have I do have a couple things for Viviana if she ever shows up. Viviana, if you're here, let me know, and I would love to send it. But you might recognize that. That's our classroom. There's our plant. Everything's been really good, and it's just there. It is. That's our space. It's there without us, and so let's get on to the stuff. Yes, I'm a school teacher. Yes, I am a 5th grade educator. Yes, I have the fortune right now of working with the Broncos of Gwyn Oaks. My graduates are on their way. I have some past graduates, Riley T. I have a few others, maybe Zachary B. might be out there as well. And I do have some past graduates, like old graduates who are here. And in fact, I was on the phone with a very special person on the way home from school today, and that was Miss Carlene K. O'Keefe. That is my mama, Kitty O'Keefe. And if I am not mistaken, she may be live with us today. She had to go and try to catch up on chapter 15, but that was like 45 minutes ago. So if she got to it, she is here. Oh, hello, Gonsalveses. It's good to see you too. All right. So anyway, oh, Caden B, you are here too. Good to see you. I'm trying to see if I have to say hello to anybody else. Ah, Xavier, you finally showed up. Nice of you to make it. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are in a moment of excitement. Billy and his dogs have worked up to this moment without him even knowing it. He was just going to have his dogs out in the Ozark Mountains, having good competition between him and his two dogs and the ringtails. And it is at this point that his grandfather yesterday, well, at least in our case, they made the trek in order to go to a championship coonhound event, a tournament. Yesterday, if you had the joy of being with us, we also saw where the silver cup came from. And that's been really exciting. Of course, we probably remember also that Billy had to borrow a special brush from a certain someone and then greased it all down with like butter. And then Grandpa wanted to go take a shave before the big event. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we are going to dig into chapter 16 today. And if I'm not mistaken, there were 3 nights of competition. Billy has the plan to go into another holler or another location, another valley, and maybe see if he can find some more coons. His grandfather has made the rest of the hunters frightened due to the fact that, supposedly Billy and his 2 dogs have caught up to how many at one time? That's right. Boom. 6, which isn't true. He has treed 4 times is what he said. And right now, if he doesn't get 3, he's out of the competition. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, chapter 16 of Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. Let's have a great time. Ladies and gentlemen, let's roll. Chapter 16. In the afternoon, our judge came over and introduced himself. He told us that he'd be going with us that night. About sundown, we piled in our buggy and drove a few miles downriver, so I guess it does follow the rules. I noticed other hunters doing the same thing. Everyone was trying to get away from the already hunted territory. It was dark by the time Grandpa stopped. I untied the ropes from my dogs. Little Ann reared up on me and whined. Old Dan walked off a few yards, stretched his body, and dragged his claws through the soft bottom soil. Opening his mouth, he let out a loud bawl, and then disappeared in the thick timber. Little Ann was right on his heels. Idiom. Right on his heels does not mean that she was taking a ride on the back ends of his feet. Right on his heels obviously is an idiom that means right behind him. We took off after him. Grandpa got nervous. He said to me, "Don't you think you ought to whoop to him?" I told him to wait a little while. There would be plenty of time for whooping. He snorted and he said he thought a hunter always whooped to his dogs. "I do, Grandpa," I said. Hold on. Wow, it's raining like crazy right now. It's awesome. "I do, Grandpa," I said, "but not before they strike a trail." We walked on. Every now and then we would stop and listen. I could hear the loud snuffing of old Dan. Once we caught a glimpse of little Ann as she darted across an opening that was bathed in moonlight. She was as silent as a ghost and as quick as a flitting shadow. Papa said, "Sure is a beautiful night for hunting." Judge said, "You can't beat these Ozark Mountains nights for beauty. I don't care where you go." Grandpa started to say something. His voice was drowned out by the belly-like cry of little Ann. In a whisper, I said, "Come on, Dan. Hurry up. Help her out." In a whisper. Sorry, I got so excited. I'm so sorry. "Come on, Dan. Hurry up. Help her out." As if in an answer to my words, his deep voice hammered its way through the river bottoms. I felt the blood tingling in my veins. That wonderful feeling that only a hunter knows crept over my body. Jerking off his hat and throwing back his head, he let out a yell. It wasn't a whoop or a screech. It was about halfway in between. Everyone laughed. Grandpa, I said, that was a good whoop. The coon was running upriver toward our campground. We turned and we followed. I could tell by our dogs' voices that they were running side by side and were hot on the trail. Closing my eyes, I could almost see them running bodies stretched to their fullest length, legs pounding up and down, white steam rolling from their hot breath in the frosty night. Grandpa got tangled up in some underbrush and lost his hat and spectacles. It took us a while to find the glasses. Papa said something about getting them wired on with baling wire. Grandpa snorted. The judge laughed. The coon crossed the river and ran upstream. Soon my dogs were out of hearing distance. I told Papa we'd better stay on our side of the river and keep going until we could hear them again. 20 minutes later, we heard them coming back. We stopped. I think they've crossed back to our side, I said. All at once, the voices of my dogs were drowned out by a loud roar. What in the world was that? Grandpa said. I don't know, the judge said. Reckon it was the wind. Maybe thunder. About that time, we heard it again. The judge started laughing. I know what that is, he said. Those hounds have run that coon right back by our camp. The noise we just heard was all the other hunters whooping to him. Everyone laughed. A few minutes later, I heard my dogs bawling treed. On reaching the tree, Papa ran his hand back under his coat. He pulled out Grandpa's gun. That's a funny-looking gun, the judge said. It's a 410 gauge pistol, isn't it? It's the very thing for this kind of work, Papa said. You couldn't kill a coon with it if you tried, especially if you're using birdshot. All it'll do is sting his hide a little. At the crack of the gun, the coon gave a loud squall and jumped. My dogs lost no time in killing him. Do you get what happened? So Papa does have a gun, but it's got this bird shot in it, and that means that it has this canister filled with a whole bunch of very small metal BBs. And so when he shot it, it shoots out in this bird shot concept, so it kind of spits out real wide, but it cannot kill an animal like a raccoon. What it can do, though, is certainly give him a little bit of a thwap on the rear end and send him hollering. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to get the coon out of the tree so that the dogs could take care of things. We skinned that coon, and soon we were on our way again. The next time my dogs treed, they were across the river from us. Finding a riffle, we pulled our shoes and started across. Grandpa very gingerly started picking his way. His tender old feet moved from one smooth rock to another. Everything was fine until we reached midstream, where the current was much swifter. He stepped on a loose round rock. It rolled, and down he went. As the cold river water touched his body, he let out a yell that I could have heard for miles. He looked so funny we couldn't keep from laughing. Papa and the judge helped him to his feet. Laughing every step of the way, we finally reached the other side. Grandpa kept going in his wet clothes until we reached the tree where the dogs were. After killing the second coon, we skinned the coon, and soon we were on our way again. That was higher up in the book on the page. The next time my dogs treed, so this is the second raccoon. Didn't seem like very much time had gone by. So my grandpa kept going in his wet clothes until we reached the tree where the dogs were. After killing the coon, we built a large fire so Grandpa could dry his clothes. He'd get up as close to the fire as he could and turn this way and that. He looked so funny standing there with his long underwear steaming, I started rolling with laughter. He looked over at me and snapped, "What's so funny?" I said, "Nothing." "Well, why are you laughing then?" he said. At this remark, Papa and the judge laughed until their eyes watered. Mumbling and grumbling, Grandpa said, "If you fellas were as cold as I am, you wouldn't be laughing." We knew we shouldn't be laughing, but we couldn't help ourselves. The judge looked at his watch. "It's after 3 o'clock in the morning." He said, "Do you think they can tree another one?" As if to throw the words back in the judge's face, old Dan opened up with another bawl. I stood up and whooped. Hooey! Get him, Dan! Get him! Put him up a tree! A little one! There was a mad scramble. Grandpa tried to put his britches on backwards. The judge and Papa ran over to help him with his shoes. Each one tried to put a shoe on the wrong foot. I was laughing so hard I could do nothing. 100 yards from the fire, I realized we had forgotten the coonskins. I ran back to get them. My dogs had jumped the coon in swampland. He tore out for the river bottoms. I could tell that they were close to him by their fast bawling. All at once, their baying stopped. We stood still and listened. Old Dan bawled treed a few more times and then stopped. Grandpa asked, "What's happened?" I told him that the coon had probably pulled some kind of trick. Coming up to my dogs, we saw that they were working up and down an old rail fence. We stood and watched. Every now and then, old Dan would rear up on a large hackberry tree that was standing about 7 feet from the fence and bawled tree. As yet, little Ann had not bawled the tree bark. We watched her. She was working everywhere. She climbed up on the rail fence and followed its zigzag course until she disappeared into the darkness. I told Papa I was sure the coon had walked the rail fence and in some way had fooled my dogs. Old Dan would keep coming back to the hackberry tree. He would rear up on it and bawl tree. We walked up to him. Looking the tree over, we could see that the coon was not in that tree. The judge said, "Looks like he's got him fooled." "Maybe you'd better call him off," Grandpa said. "We can go someplace else and hunt. We've got to get one more coon if I have to tree it myself." Boy, that Grandpa, he sure is a nice guy, and he is determined. For some reason, no one laughed at his remark. "It's almost daylight," Papa said. "Yeah, that's what's got me worried," I said. "We don't have time to do any more hunting. If we lose this one, we're beat." Hearing the word beat, Grandpa began to fidget. He asked me, "What do you think happened? How did that coon fool these dogs?" "I don't know for sure," I said. "He walked that rail fence. The hackberry tree has something to do with this trick, but I don't know what." "Son," the judge said, "I wouldn't feel too badly if I were you. I've seen some of the best hounds fooled by a smart old coon." Regardless of all the discouraging talk, the love and belief I had in my little red hounds never faltered. I could see them now and then leaping over old logs, tearing through the underbrush, sniffing and searching for that lost trail. My heart swelled with pride. I whooped. I urged them on. In a low voice, the judge said, "I'll say one thing. These dogs don't give up." Birds began chirping. The sky took on a light gray color. Tiny dim stars were blinking the night away. "Looks like we're beat," Papa said. "It's getting to be daylight." Right now, do you have just that little bit of doubt? You have that little bit that maybe Billy's going to learn that he doesn't get to win everything? Let's see what happens. Oh, listen to the next 3 words. At that moment. It's not done yet. I'm going to start with Papa's statement again. "It looks like we're beat," Papa said. "It's getting daylight." At that moment, a loud, clear voice of a red-bone hound, bawling treed, rang through the river bottoms. It was the voice of little Ann. Sucking in a mouthful of air, I held it. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. I closed my eyes tight and gritted my teeth to keep the tears from coming. "Let's go to him," Grandpa said. "No, wait, I said. "Why?" he asked. "Wait till old Dan gets there," I said. "It's daylight now, and if we walk up to that tree, the coon will jump out. It's hard to keep a coon in a tree after daylight. Let's wait until old Dan gets there. If he jumps, he won't have a chance to get away." "Boy's right," the judge said. "It's hard to keep a coon in a tree after daybreak." Just then, we heard old Dan. His deep voice shattered the morning silence. Searching for the lost trail, he had crossed the fence and worked his way out into an old field. Turning around, we saw him coming. He was a red blur in the gray morning shadows. Coming to the rail fence, and without breaking his stride, he raised his body into the air about halfway over, and while still in the air, he bawled. Oh my gosh, I got chills. Oh my gosh, I'm just chilling up right now. Do you ever do that? Like, you get so excited, you just get chills. I wish I could show you them. They're all over me right now. Woo! Hitting the ground with a loud grunt, he ran right past us. Everyone whooped to him. Ahead was a deep washout about 10 feet wide. On the other side was a canebrake. His long red body, stretched to its fullest length, seemed to float in the air as he sailed over it. We could hear the tall stalks rattling as he plowed his way through them. A bunch of sleepy snowbirds rose from the thick cane, flitted over, and settled in a row along the fence rail. Near in the tree, we could see it was a tall sycamore. We know about sycamores, don't we? And there, high in the top, was the coon. Grandpa threw a fit. He hopped around whooping and hollering. He threw his old hat down on the ground and jumped up and down on it. Then he ran over and kissed little Ann right on the head. After we killed and skinned the coon, the judge said, "Let's walk back to that old fence. I think I know how the old fellow pulled his trick." Back at the fence, the judge stood and looked around for just a few minutes. Smiling, he said, "Yep, that's how he did it." "How?" Grandpa asked. Still smiling, the judge said, "That old coon walked this rail fence. Coming even with the hackberry tree, he leaped up on its side and climbed up. Notice how the thick timber is around here. See that limb way up there in the top? The one that runs over and almost touches the sycamore?" We saw what he meant. The coon walked all the way out on that limb, leaped over and caught the sycamore limb. Repeating this over and over from tree to tree, he worked his way far out into the river bottoms. What I can't figure out is how that hound figured it out. Gazing at little Ann, he shook his head and said, "I've been hunting coons and judging coon hunts for 40 years. I've never seen something like that." Oh my gosh. Isn't that just so exciting? Oh my gosh. Gazing at little Ann, he shook his head and said, I got to read it again because it's just so good. Gazing at little Ann, he shook his head and said, "I've been hunting coons and judging coon hunts for over 40 years, but I've never seen anything like that." He looked at me. "Well, son," he said, "you have tied the leading teams. There's only one more night of eliminations. Even if some of them get more than 3 coons, you will still be in the runoff. And from what I've seen here, you have a good chance of winning that cup." I knew that little Ann had scented the coon in the air, the same as she had the ghost coon. I walked over and knelt down by her side. The things I wanted to say to her, I couldn't, for the knot in my throat. But I'm sure she understood. As we came into the campground, the hunters came out of their tents and gathered around us. The judge held up the 3 big coon hides. There was a roar from the crowd. One man said, "That was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen." "What's a beautiful sight?" Grandpa asked. "Last night, those little red hounds brought that coon right through the middle of camp." The judge said, "We figured they did when we heard the noise." Laughing, the man said, "We heard them when they ran up the other side of the river. Way up above here, they crossed over. We could tell that they were coming back, so we doused all the fires, and sure enough, they came right through camp. Those 2 little hounds weren't 50 yards behind that coon, running side by side. Boy, they were picking them up and laying them down and bawling every time their feet touched the ground. I'll tell you, it was the prettiest sight we ever saw." When the judge started telling about the last coon little Ann had treed, and I took my dogs over to our tent and fed and watered them. After they had had their fill, I gave them a good rub down with a piece of gunny sack. Taking them out to the buggy, I tied them up. I stood and watched while they twisted around in the haymaking of their bed. That day, I tried to get some sleep in our tent, but the soaking Grandpa had taken in the river had given him a cold, causing him to snore. I never heard such a racket in all my life. I'd have sworn he rattled the paper sacks in our grocery boxes. Taking a blanket, I went out to my dogs. Little Ann had wiggled up as close to old Dan as she could. Prying them apart, I lay down between them and fell asleep. The last night of the eliminations turned out like the second night. None of the judges turned in more than 2 hides. Oh man, I'm so excited. That day, about noon, the owners of the other winning teams and I were called for a conference with the head judge. He said, "Gentlemen, the eliminations are over. Only 3 sets of hounds are left for the runoff. The winner of tonight's hunt will receive the gold cup. If there is a tie for the championship, naturally, there will be another runoff." He shook hands with each of us and wished us good luck. Tension began to build up in the camp. Here and there, hunters were standing in small groups, talking. Others could be seen going in and out of tents with rolls of money in their hands. Grandpa was the busiest one of all. His voice could be heard all over camp. Men were looking at me and talking in low tones. I strutted like a turkey gobbler. Pause. This is called an inference. If you hear these clues, everybody's sitting around in small groups. Everybody's talking. Everybody's looking at Billy and his dogs, and everybody's looking at the other dogs. And there's money being walked around, and Grandpa is the loudest of them all. This is called an inference. What do you infer? What's happening right now? Yeah, I think you guys are getting it. Let's find out if we're right. That evening, while we were having supper, a hunter dropped by. He had a small box in his hand. Smiling, he said, "Everybody's agreed that we should have a jackpot for the winner. I've been picked to do the collecting." Grandpa said, "You may as well leave the box here now." Looking at me, the hunter said, "Son, I think almost every man in this camp is hoping you win it. But it's not going to be easy. You're going up against 4 of the finest hounds there are." Turning to my father, he said, "Did you know the 2 big Walker hounds have won 4 gold cups?" 4 gold cups. Very seriously, Papa said, "You know, I have 2 mules down at my place. One is almost as big as a barn. The other one isn't much bigger than a jackrabbit. But that little mule can outpull the big one every time." Smiling, the hunter turned to leave. He said, "You could be right." Papa asked me again where I thought we should start hunting. I had been thinking about this all day. I said, "You remember where we jumped that last coon in the swamp?" Papa said, "Yes." "Well, the way I figure, more than one coon lives in that swamp," I said. "It's a good place for them as there's lots of crawfish and minnows in those potholes. If a hound jumps one there, he's got a good chance to tree him." Papa asked, "Why?" "It's a long way back to the river, and it's about the same distance up to the mountains," I said. "Either way he runs, a dog can get pretty close to him, and so he won't have time to take a tree." That evening, we climbed into Grandpa's buggy and headed for the swamp. It was dark by the time we reached it. Grandpa handed Papa his gun, saying, "You're getting to be a pretty good shot with this thing." "I hope I get to shoot it a lot tonight," Papa said. Under my breath, I said, "I do too." After untying the ropes for my dogs, I held on to their collars for a brief moment. Pulling them up close, I knelt down and whispered, "This is the last night. I know you'll do your best." They seemed to understand and tugged at their collars. When I turned them loose, they started for the timber. Just as they reached the dark shadows, they stopped, turned around, and stared straight at me for an instant. The judge saw their strange action. Laying a hand on my shoulder, he asked, "What did they just say to you, son?" I said, "Nothing that anyone could understand. But I can feel that they know this hunt is important. They know it just as well as you or I." It was little Ann who found the trail. Before the echo of her sharp cry had died away, old Dan's deep voice floated out over that swamp. "Woo!" "Well, let's go," Papa said eagerly. "No, let's wait a minute," I said. "Wait? Why?" Grandpa asked. "To see which way he's going to run," I said. The coon broke out of the swamp and headed for the river. Listening to my dogs, I could tell that they were close by. I said to Papa, "I don't think he'll ever make it to the river." They're right on his heels now. By the time we circled the swamp, they were ball and treed. The judge said, "Boy, that was fast." I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. Looking at me, he smiled and nodded his head. Papa and I knew I had judged the coon perfectly. He didn't have time to reach the river or the mountains. My dog had trained the coon in a tall ash, which stood about 50 yards from the river. I knew the 50 yards had saved us about a good hour, because he could have pulled that trick after trick after trick if he had ever found the water. We spied the coon in the topmost branches of this ash. At the crack of the gun, he ran far out on a limb and jumped. He landed in an old fallen treetop. He scooted through it. Coming out on the other side, he ran for the river. The tangled mass of limbs slowed my dogs, and they all but tore the treetop apart getting out of it. The coon was just one step ahead of them as they reached the river. We heard him hit the water. Running over, we stood and watched the fight. The coon was at home in the river. He crawled up on old Dan's head, trying to force him under. Before he could do it, little Ann reached up and pulled him off. In a scared voice, Pop said, the water looks deep to me. Maybe you'd better call him off, said the judge. That's a big coon, and he could drown one of them easily in that deep water. Call him off, I said. Why, you couldn't whip them off with a stick. There's no use for anyone to get scared. They know exactly what they're doing. I've seen this more times than one. Grandpa was scared and excited. He was jumping up and down, whooping and hollering. Papa raised the gun to aim. I jumped and grabbed his arm. Don't do that, I yelled. You're sure to hit one of the dogs. Round and round in the deep water, the fight went on. The coon climbed on old Dan's head and sank his teeth into one of his long, tender ears. Old Dan bawled with pain. Little Ann swam in and caught one of the coon's hind legs in her mouth. She tried hard to pull him off. All three disappeared under the water. I held my breath. Are you doing that too? The water churned and boiled. All three came to the top about the same time. The coon was between the bank we were standing on and my dogs. He swam toward us. They caught him again just as he reached the shore. He fought his way free and ran for a large sycamore. Old Dan caught him just as he started up. I knew that was the end of the fight. That's the end of a paragraph. After it was all over. Did you see how that happened? As soon as Billy watched that raccoon climb that tree and Dan grabbing him before he went off, he knew it was done. And the good writer decided not to leave it as a real gross and grotesque moment where the dogs did what they need to do to take care of the coon, but just skip to after it was all over. That gives us our imagination moment. After it was all over and the coon had been skinned, Grandpa said, I hope we don't have to go through that again tonight. For a while, I sure thought your dogs were goners. The judge said, well, have you seen that? Look over there. Old Dan was standing perfectly still, with eyes closed and head hanging down. Little Ann was licking at his cut and his bleeding ear. She always does that, I said. If you'll watch, when she gets done with him, he's going to do the same for her. We stood and watched until they had finished doctoring each other. Then, trotting side by side, they disappeared into the darkness. We followed along, stopping now and then to listen. Chapter 17. It's where I end. One chapter a day is what I've been told. Leaves us hanging, leaves us wondering. But I want to tell you, there's not much left. And I want you to see this. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you know that I want to keep reading. You know I want to. But a championship tournament on the last night of championship, I have a feeling we might be in here for a few chapters. I know, I'm sorry. So, here's the thing that I'm going to say to y'all. Oh my gosh, was that a great chapter? Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone, for coming along on this beautiful ride. I love this. I love this book. Now, I want to take just a moment at the end of our time together today for you to think about some of the books that have made a difference in your life. The ones that have spoken to your heart. The ones that have talked to you in ways that other books just don't do that. And I'm going to tell you that this is one of mine. I have quite a few. Now, the thing that I want to say is that he's been whispering some other ideas into my head about the next book that we're going to start reading. Now, I know we're not done with this book, and I'm not trying to rush through it. But what I'm going to tell you is if we do the math, I believe we're going to be probably done with this book by next Wednesday, a week from now. And so if that's the case, we need to start thinking about what we're going to do next, what book comes next. Now, I've got some ideas. I've got some great ideas, and I'm going to tell you that I have the thinking that maybe kind of like Billy, I know where to go next. But if you have any recommendations that you would like me to consider, I want you to give me a little bit of a comment. If need be, I promise that what I'm going to do is after this uploads, I am going to put my other email address in, the one that I can check. And if you want to give me a recommendation, I want you to write Mr. O's Read Aloud in the title of your email and write me the name and why you think we should consider your book to be the next one that we read. I'm not kidding. All I want is a good book. That's all we need. And I want to keep this rolling because this has been so much fun for me. I love sitting on my front porch. I love reading. It guarantees that I have had 35 minutes of good reading, good literature in my ears and in my mind and in my heart. And I want to know if you guys have some other ideas. Now, I may take it, I may not. But I will tell you, by Friday, we need to start voting on what the next book's going to be. And I want you to be a part of that. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. I don't know how the weather is where you're at, but it's pretty dang nice over here. I got my bare feet. I'm going to go out and play in the water like Billy does. I'm going to see what it's like, and I'm going to toughen up the soles of my feet. So without further ado, everybody, I love you. Have a great day. Be safe. Go and tell somebody an awesome story. Give me some recommendations. I'll put my address down in the recorded version. Usually takes a few hours for it to come up. But if you got an idea, you pass it on. I love you. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. And now, get out of here.